Think back to how you used to navigate a totally unfamiliar city,
Right.
like maybe 20 years ago.
Oh, yeah.
You'd probably have this physical paper map.
One of those massive folded up things.
Exactly, yeah, one of those unwieldy atlases that just lived in your glove compartment.
Mm.
And the creases are all torn because you folded it wrong 100 times.
Right.
And if you wanted to find a coffee shop on the other side of town, you literally had to pull over, trace the grid with your finger, look out the window to find a street sign, and just try to orient yourself in physical space.
Oh, it's incredibly slow.
So slow.
Yeah.
And frustrating. You'd get lost all the time.
Yeah.
But here is the critical thing about that paper map. It was just a dead piece of paper.
Yeah.
It didn't know you were using it. It didn't know your final destination. It didn't track how fast you were driving. And it definitely didn't log the coordinates of the coffee shop you eventually parked at.
Total invisibility.
Right. You had absolute friction, sure, but you also had absolute invisibility.
Yeah. But then, GPS arrived. And initially, it didn't really feel like a paradigm shift, right? It just felt like a better map.
Yeah, a gadget.
Yeah, you bought this dedicated device, stuck it to your windshield, and it just told you where to turn. The friction just vanished. You didn't have to pull over anymore. You traded a tiny bit of data, your location at that exact moment, for an immense amount of convenience.
And it was a trade-off that felt entirely rational. I mean, to almost everyone.
Absolutely. But then a really subtle shift occurred. The standalone device became an app on your phone.
Oh, right.
And then the app integrated with your calendar to know where you were going before you even left. It integrated with the traffic grid, with local business reviews, with your search history.
It just swallowed everything.
Yeah, and eventually we reached a point where you practically cannot navigate the modern world without a system knowing your exact coordinates, your typical routes, and your predicted arrival time.
And the wild part is we didn't just accept this. We, demanded it. We happily handed over that invisibility because the convenience was it was too good to pass up.
And that trajectory, right? The willing surrender of invisibility for frictionless convenience, that is the exact mechanism we're looking at today.
But not for maps.
No, not for physical location anymore. We are talking about something much, much more intimate. We're talking about applying that exact same trajectory to your money, your identity, and, well, your fundamental ability to buy, sell, and exist in modern society.
So you traded invisibility for convenience. We all did. But what if we applied that exact same GPS-style technology to your bank account?
Right.
What if your money knew where you were, what you were buying, and could simply refuse to work if it decided you were off route?
It's a heavy thought.
It really is. And today, our mission on this deep dive is to unpack this massive, sprawling stack of research that explores this exact scenario. Specifically, we've got a comprehensive 2026 presentation titled The Architecture and the Architecture's Refusers, and a really heavy meta-analysis of 9 peer-reviewed studies by an author named Michael R. Williams.
It's an incredible body of work.
It is. We are going to explore this impending shift in how human beings interact with control grids.
And the central claim in Williams's work, the concept that really, grounds this entire analysis, is that the distance between our current reality and a fully integrated, inescapable financial control grid is no longer a technical engineering problem.
Meaning the tech is already there.
Exactly. We don't need to invent any new technology to make this happen. The infrastructure is already built, it's tested, and it's just waiting. The only gap that remains between today and a total financial surveillance state is simply a political and ideological choice.
Okay, before we go any further, we need to set some explicit ground rules for this deep dive.
Yes, definitely.
Because the moment we start talking about, financial control grids or programmable money, we are stepping into highly, highly sensitive territory. The source material covers intensely politically charged topics, government financial repression, and even eschatological religious prophecies regarding totalitarian surveillance.
Right. And we need to be abundantly clear about this. Neither of us is taking a side on these issues today.
At all.
We're not endorsing any specific political viewpoint. We are not advocating for the implementation of these systems, nor are we advocating against them.
Yeah.
Furthermore, we are not passing judgment on the religious or ideological beliefs analyzed in these papers. Our sole mission is to unpack the author's rigorous analytical framework.
We want you, the listener, to understand the exact blueprints of this proposed future so you can evaluate the architecture for yourself.
Yeah.
We are just impartially reporting on the mechanics detailed in the text.
We are just the tour guides through the data.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So let's start looking at the blueprints. To understand how society is going to react to this impending tracking of our entire economic existence, we really have to look at the pillars holding it up.
Right.
And Williams calls this the ABCD system. Let's break down that acronym.
So the ABCD system represents 4 distinct technological pillars. A stands for artificial intelligence. B stands for biometric identity. C stands for central bank digital currency, which the text also frequently refers to as programmable money. And D stands for digital control.
All right, let's pull these apart, starting with A, artificial intelligence. Now, when the sources talk about AI in this context, they aren't talking about, generative language models writing poetry or helping you draft an email.
Not at all.
They are talking about opaque, algorithmic decisioning systems. Like imagine you're a small business owner, right? You've been running a hardware store for 20 years. You need a short-term loan to buy winter inventory.
Right. A totally normal scenario.
Yeah. In the old system, you walked into a local bank branch, sat down with a human underwriter, explained your situation, and maybe they knew your character and they just gave you the loan.
Exactly. But in the AI pillar of the ABCD system, there is no human.
None.
An algorithm scrapes your entire transaction history, your geographic location, your social media sentiment, and maybe even the carbon footprint of your supply chain.
Wow.
And then it renders a binary decision in a millisecond.
And crucially, the author notes that decision operates without appeal. It's the automation of risk assessment and compliance operating at a scale that human beings literally cannot process.
Right. It's machine learning, credit allocation, and fraud detection. The AI determines your eligibility continuously.
Then we move to B, which is biometric identity. And this feels like the anchor.
It absolutely is the anchor.
Fingerprints, facial recognition, iris scans, voice authentication, or even, like, palm vein scanners. The author points out that traditional banking relied on proxy identities.
Right. Things you hold.
Yeah, you had a piece of plastic with a magnetic stripe, a PIN code, a password, or maybe a social security number, but those things are detachable from the human being.
Exactly. You can lose a card, you can share a password, you can use a pseudonym online.
But biometrics eliminate that detachment. The key function of the B pillar is that it binds the financial account inextricably to the unfalsifiable physical body.
You cannot just leave your face at home. If your identity is tied to your iris, you are structurally bound to every single transaction you make. You become the ledger.
Which, if we're being honest, feels like it's already the water we swim in. I mean, I unlock my phone 100 times a day by just looking at it.
Same.
I board an airplane without showing a boarding pass because a camera scans my face at the gate. The A and the B are heavily integrated into our daily routines already.
They are.
But C is where the architecture takes a massive leap. C stands for Central Bank Digital Currency, or CBDC. And the text uses the term programmable money. We need to spend some time here because this isn't just a digital version of a $20 bill, right?
Not at all.
Like when I send someone money on Venmo or PayPal right now, isn't that already digital money?
It is digital, yes, but it is not programmable base money.
What's the difference?
So the money you use on PayPal is a digital representation of a commercial bank deposit, which is ultimately a liability of that specific commercial bank. A CBDC is a direct liability of the central bank itself.
Okay, got it.
But the truly defining feature, the reason it's the C in this control grid, is programmability. The money itself contains software logic. It can be conditioned.
Okay, give me a concrete example of how money gets conditioned. Like, how does a digital dollar behave differently than a physical dollar?
Well, a physical dollar bill is totally agnostic.
Right.
It doesn't care who holds it, what it's buying, or what year it is. Programmable money, though, can be coded with specific parameters. The central administering authority can literally tell the money what it may buy, where it may be spent, and until when it is valid.
So it could expire.
Yes. For instance, in an economic downturn, the government might want to stimulate local spending. They could issue a stimulus payment in CBDC with what's called a melt rate.
A melt rate.
Yeah, the code dictates that if you do not spend this money within 30 days, it slowly deletes itself from your wallet.
Wow.
Or they could geofence the money. The code might state that these specific funds can only be spent at businesses located within a 10-mile radius of your primary residence to prevent capital flight from a struggling neighborhood.
Or, thinking about the AI integration from earlier, the money could be programmed to restrict purchases based on behavioral or environmental metrics, right?
Exactly.
So if the AI determines you've exceeded, say, a personal carbon allowance for the month, the programmable money in your wallet simply will not clear a transaction at a gas station, or it won't allow you to purchase a flight.
Right.
You literally have the funds in your account, but the money itself refuses to execute the trade because the program conditions haven't been met.
That is exactly the mechanism. And then that brings us to the final pillar, D, the digital control layer.
Okay, the overarching surveillance.
Yes. This is the architecture that monitors the execution of the A, B, and C pillars in real time. It's the integration of digital tripwire systems built to spot money laundering, terrorist financing, or, ideological noncompliance in milliseconds.
It's the all-seeing eye.
Pretty much. It provides the administering authority with the real-time, transaction-level visibility required to flag, freeze, deny, or completely switch off an individual's economic participation instantly.
So we have the AI making the risk decisions, the biometrics tying the account to your physical body, the CBDC providing the programmable money, and the digital control layer monitoring every single node on the network.
That's the stack.
But, looking at these four things, I'm struck by the fact that none of this is actually science fiction. We've had algorithms denying credit card applications for decades.
Right.
We've had fingerprint scanners on laptops since, the early 2000s. Governments have been trying to track illicit financial flows forever. What is the actual breakthrough that Williams is writing about here? Why is a 2026 meta-analysis treating this like some impending singularity?
Because the danger, according to the research, is not the invention of any single pillar. The danger is their fusion.
The fusion.
Yes. The breakthrough is the integration of these four formerly disparate technologies into a single control surface.
Okay, explain that.
Historically, identity, transaction, and eligibility were completely separate processes, right? Handled by different entities at different times.
Sure.
You proved your identity to the DMV to get a license. You proved your creditworthiness to a bank to get a card. You executed a transaction at a merchant. In the integrated ABCD system, these processes collapse into a single moment.
They happen simultaneously at the point of sale.
Yes. When you walk into a grocery store to buy a loaf of bread, the system verifies your physical body, checks your AI-determined eligibility to purchase that specific item, clears the programmable rules embedded in the money, and logs the entire event in the digital control layer.
All at once.
All in the fraction of a second it takes for a camera to scan your face. The author concludes that when this fusion reaches maturity, anonymity doesn't just become difficult, it becomes structurally impossible. The architecture simply does not possess a mechanism for an anonymous exchange of value.
Hearing all of this laid out, the absolute tracking, the conditioning of money, the end of anonymity, it inherently sounds dystopian.
It does.
I mean, if I use terms like control surface or coercive capacity with my friends, they're going to picture a totalitarian regime forcing this upon a terrified, oppressed populace, right? Like stormtroopers at the grocery store.
Right. But that's not how this rolls out, is it?
No. The sources are incredibly clear that people are not going to be forced onto this grid at gunpoint. They're going to beg for it.
Yeah. The meta-analysis spends a massive portion of its framework detailing the genuine pull of the system. Administrators do not market the ABCD architecture as a control grid.
Right.
They market it using 4 specific frames, and the benefits they highlight are entirely genuine. The first frame is convenience. It is an all-in-one, frictionless digital wallet designed entirely around optimizing the user experience.
Think about the friction of legacy banking, waiting 3 days for a check to clear, getting your card locked because you traveled to a different state and the bank's legacy fraud algorithm just panicked.
Oh, that's the worst.
Or having to remember 16 different passwords with special characters just to pay your utility bills. The ABCD system says, look at this camera and your mortgage is paid. Look at this camera and your groceries are bought. The convenience is intoxicating.
It really is. And the second frame is inclusion, which is a massive diplomatic and economic selling point globally. The legacy financial system left billions of people behind.
Entirely.
If you live in a developing nation without traditional credit bureaus, without physical bank branches, and without formal property titles, you are just locked out of the global economy. The ABCD system promises to bank the unbanked. If you have a face and a mobile connection, you have a bank account.
Then there is the security frame. Anti-money laundering, counterterrorism, eliminating drug cartel.
Huge selling points.
If the system demands a verified, biometrically authenticated physical body for every single transaction, human trafficking networks lose their ability to move funds. Tax evasion becomes mathematically impossible because every cent is tracked on the central ledger. If you were a law-abiding citizen, the pitch is basically, why would you oppose a system that eradicates organized crime overnight? What do you have to hide?
And the fourth frame is trust and efficiency. The legacy correspondent banking system, the network of intermediary banks passing messages back and forth to clear international wires. It's slow, it's expensive, and it's prone to catastrophic
Not
errors.
so clunky.
But a sovereign central bank running an integrated digital ledger that's mathematically auditable, instantly settled, and vastly cheaper to administer at a national scale.
I look at those four frames: convenience, inclusion, security, trust, and voice. I have to ask the obvious question. If the benefits are this genuine, and they truly solve massive global problems, isn't calling it a control grid overly dramatic?
Well,
I mean, if I choose to use an AI-driven biometric digital wallet because it gets me through the airport faster and stops my identity from being stolen, I'm not being coerced. I'm making a free market choice. Am I missing something fundamental here, or is the author just inherently suspicious of technology?
the author isn't disputing the reality of those benefits. What Williams analyzes is the deferred cost of that transaction.
Okay, deferred cost.
Right. The system advances by consent, operating on the principle of the path of least resistance. The architecture is designed to be default on. The benefits you mentioned, the speed, the security, the inclusion, they are immediate, highly tangible. You feel them the exact moment you scan your face.
Sure.
The costs, however, are diffuse, abstract, and deferred. You do not feel the loss of your transactional autonomy today. You only feel it years down the line when the system is fully locked in, the cash alternatives have been quietly retired, and the administering authority suddenly decides to change the programmable parameters of your money.
So it's the ultimate boiling frog scenario.
Exactly.
The vast majority of the population is making a highly rational, localized trade at the margin. Transaction by transaction, they evaluate the friction of using cash versus the friction of a biometric scan, and they choose the scan. They aren't naive or ignorant. They simply value the immediate frictionless experience more than some abstract philosophical concept like transactional anonymity.
Right. Most of the heavy lifting in building this architecture is done by the willing, enthusiastic consent of the public.
Yeah.
But because this system integrates so seamlessly into daily life, and because adoption is driven by this powerful rational pull, the meta-analysis poses a much darker question.
Which is?
Once the architecture is universally in place and the public is fully enrolled, what is the absolute upper limit of its coercive capacity? If the state decides it wants to use the grid to enforce total compliance, does the architecture allow for it?
Right. And to answer that question of ultimate coercive capacity, the author does something completely unexpected for a peer-reviewed economic meta-analysis. They look to history, yes, but they also look to an ancient text.
They do.
In paper 1 of the corpus, Williams addresses a concept that is normally quarantined to, like alternative internet forums, fringe media, and theology. We are talking about the biblical mark of the beast.
Yes. Paper 1 is titled Mark of the Beast or Hype of the Beast, and it is vital to understand Williams's methodology here.
Because it's not religious.
No, he is not approaching this text as a theologian attempting to prove a religious doctrine, nor is he trying to predict an apocalypse. He treats the concept, frequently abbreviated as the MOB, as an extreme analytical framework.
Okay.
He extracts the description from the 13th chapter of the Book of Revelation and distills it into a 5-condition operational checklist. He uses it as a theoretical model of total, absolute financial exclusion.
So I imagine if we're using a biblical archetype of total control, it has to be more than just, systemic poverty or high taxes. There has to be some sort of inescapable physical element to it. What exactly is this 5-point checklist the author derives from the text?
Right, so for a state administration to deploy a system that meets the full theoretical definition of the mark of the beast, it must fulfill 5 strict conditions. First, it requires an inescapable biometric or bodily identifier. It must be marked on the person.
On the person, got it.
Second, it enforces total financial exclusion for noncompliance. The text explicitly states that without it, one cannot buy or sell.
Okay, 2.
Third, it must operate with universal scope. It cannot just apply to the poor or the rich. It must encompass all demographics and classes.
It's universal.
Fourth, it requires centralized technological or administrative enforcement to manage the scale of that exclusion.
And the 5th condition.
The 5th is the critical differentiator. It requires a coercive ideological loyalty test. It demands an explicit oath worship, or allegiance to a specific ruler, image, or ideology as a mandatory precondition for access to the economic system. It's not just a tax or a functional tool, it is a spiritual or ideological toll booth.
With that five-point framework established, Williams starts running historical events through the checklist. Because state-sponsored financial repression isn't a new concept, right?
Not at all.
Governments have been locking undesirable populations out of their money for centuries. Let's look at the historical precedents he analyzes. How close have we gotten to this extreme archetype in the past?
Well, the paper examines a wide array of severe historical episodes. Let's start with the 1933 U.S. gold confiscation under Executive Order 6102.
Oh, right. FDR.
Yeah, President Franklin D. Roosevelt mandated that all private citizens surrender their gold coin, bullion, and certificates to the Federal Reserve under threat of massive fines or imprisonment. This was a centralized, state-enforced seizure of the primary store of value.
So why did EO 6102 work, and how does it measure up against the 5 conditions? I mean, they obviously didn't have facial recognition in 1933.
No, they didn't. It worked because the state monopolized the legal tender laws and threatened severe penal consequences. But when applied to the framework, it falls short.
Which conditions did it miss?
It had centralized enforcement and financial coercion, but it lacked a biometric bodily identifier. It lacked universal scope because it really only affected those holding specific gold assets. And there was no ideological loyalty test. You just had to hand over the metal.
Okay, he also looks at the 2016 Indian demonetization. And this was a wild event.
It was chaotic.
The government essentially invalidated 86% of the country's circulating cash overnight, effectively forcing hundreds of millions of people into the digital banking sector out of nowhere. The shock to the cash-reliant rural economy was just devastating.
Absolutely. It was a massive display of financial coercion and centralized control, aiming for universal scope. But again, it lacked the biometric bodily requirement, though India's Aadhaar biometric ID system is definitely adjacent to this, and it lacked the ideological loyalty test. It was framed purely as an anti-corruption and modernization effort.
Then there's the 2022 Canadian Emergency Economic Measures. This one feels much closer to the digital control layer we were just talking about.
Very close.
The government used emergency powers to freeze the bank accounts of protesting truckers and even individuals who had just donated to them, completely bypassing the standard judicial process. They literally flipped a switch and locked citizens out of the modern economy for participating in a specific political protest.
And the Canadian example is highly illustrative of the digital control layer in action. It demonstrated the capacity for rapid, targeted financial exclusion based on behavior. But it was not universal in scope. It only targeted a specific subset of protesters, and it didn't mandate a bodily identifier for daily buying and selling across the general population.
Right. And finally, China's social credit system, which uses AI and surveillance to gamify citizenship, restricting travel or loan access for bad behavior.
Yeah, the social credit system hits the AI, the centralized enforcement, and aspects of the loyalty test by enforcing behavioral compliance with state ideology. But it still operates alongside cash and legacy systems, meaning total absolute exclusion from buying a loaf of bread hasn't been fully realized yet.
So none of these historical events hit all 5 conditions. They might hit 2 or 3. But what they prove is that financial repression is a standard, recurring instrument of state administration.
Exactly.
When a government faces a crisis, whether it's the Great Depression, a massive protest, or perceived corruption, they consistently reach for the financial system to control the population.
That is the baseline historical reality Williams establishes. Financial weaponization is the norm, not an anomaly.
Think about engineers building a massive skyscraper. Before they break ground, they run complex computer simulations, right? They stress test the digital model of the building against a worst-case scenario.
Like an earthquake.
Yeah, say a 9.0 magnitude earthquake directly under the foundation. The engineers aren't saying they want the earthquake to happen. They aren't even predicting when it will happen. They're simply using the ultimate worst-case scenario to test the maximum architectural capacity of their materials.
And that is exactly what Williams is doing here.
Exactly. He is using the mark of the beast, the ultimate cultural archetype of totalitarian financial tyranny, to stress test the architectural capacity of the emerging ABCD system.
And the conclusion of that stress test is profoundly sobering.
It is.
When Williams applies the five-condition framework to the fully integrated ABCD system, this impending fusion of AI, biometrics, CBDCs, and digital control, he finds that the architecture structurally fulfills four of the five conditions entirely.
Let's map it up.
Condition 1, an inescapable bodily identifier. The B in ABCD, biometric integration, fulfills this completely.
Check.
Condition 2, total financial exclusion. The C, programmable CBDCs, allows the state to invalidate an individual's purchasing power instantly, making buying or selling impossible.
Check.
Condition 3, universal scope. The I in inclusion banking the unbanked ensures that the grid reaches every citizen.
Check.
Condition 4, centralized enforcement. The A and the D, the AI and the digital control layer, provide the exact mechanism required to monitor and enforce the rules across billions of transactions a second.
Check. Which means the system meets every single technological, logistical, and administrative requirement for total totalitarian control.
So what does the author call this?
He classifies the fully integrated ABCD system as a Mark of the Beast prototype, or a MOP.
MOP.
The architecture is fully capable, the gun is loaded, the safety is off, and it is sitting on the table. The only missing condition, the fifth condition, is the ideological loyalty test.
So what separates our current trajectory from absolute, inescapable financial tyranny is just a single political step. The technology doesn't need to evolve anymore.
Look, it's ready.
The infrastructure is waiting. We are just waiting to see whose finger rests on the trigger and what specific ideology, crisis, or mandate they decide to point it at. And again, keeping to our ground rules, this isn't a theological prophecy. The author is simply pointing out the architectural reality of what we are currently building in the name of convenience.
It is a latent capacity for total control, which opens up a massive behavioral question. If the architecture for total control is practically built, and the vast majority of us are currently adopting it eagerly because it makes our lives easier, how will human beings react when the dial gets turned up?
Right.
When an administration finally decides to leverage that coercive capacity, if the government says you must agree to this new mandate or your digital wallet will be suspended, what does society do?
Society fractures.
Fractures.
The meta-analysis argues aggressively that we will not react as one unified monolith. We are going to sort ourselves into very distinct, stable groups based on our tolerance for friction and our ideological red lines. This brings us to the core demographic framework of the research, which Williams calls the population stack.
The population stack. So the author projects a bifurcated equilibrium. Society splits into three primary visible groups with specific estimated percentages. Roughly 67% in what he calls the participating majority, 28% in the disenchanted dissenters, and 5% in the resistant remnant.
Plus, there is a covert fourth group called the embedded remnant.
Right. Let's start with the largest cohort, the participating majority, making up roughly 2/3 of the population. These are the individuals who evaluate the system and rationally conclude that the trade-off is worth it.
They trade their transactional autonomy for convenience, physical safety, and economic inclusion.
And I think it's important not to caricature this 67%. A lot of dystopian literature paints the compliant majority as, like, brainwashed sheep.
Right, which isn't fair or accurate.
No, the author doesn't do that. Think about a single parent working 2 jobs. The ability to receive government benefits instantly into a digital wallet without paying check cashing fees, that is a massive quality of life improvement.
Absolutely.
If the AI credit score is the only way they can get a mortgage, they're going to embrace the AI. Playing by the rules of the system provides safety and speed. It is a highly illogical choice for anyone who just wants to live their life.
The architecture is explicitly designed to reward them. But operating alongside them, occupying this really fascinating psychological space, is a group introduced in Paper 9, the embedded remnant.
This might be my favorite concept in the entire stack. Tell me about the embedded remnant.
So the embedded remnant remains physically and economically inside the ABCD grid. They scan their biometrics at the grocery store, they accept their salary in programmable CBDC, they do not protest publicly.
So they look perfectly compliant.
Yes. Functionally, on the digital control layer, they look exactly like a model citizen of the participating majority. But internally, sociologically, they are cultivating a parallel, differentiated identity. They hold a specific culture, a set of religious values, or a political resistance that is in direct defiance of the system's ideological mandates.
Wow.
They are hiding in plain sight, attempting to pass their values down to their children while actively avoiding the AI's pattern detection algorithms.
They're essentially double agents living their normal lives. But how do you actually do that? I mean, the author talks about a discoverability cohesion trade-off curve that dictates how these groups survive, right?
It is the brutal mathematical reality of operating an underground network. If you are part of the embedded remnant and you want to maintain strong internal cohesion, meaning you want to gather with your fellow resistors, share literature, coordinate mutual aid, or conduct unauthorized religious services, you have to communicate.
Right, you have to organize.
You have to physically move.
Right.
And every time you do that, you generate data exhaust. You become more discoverable by the AI surveillance layer.
So cohesion increases discoverability.
Exactly. Conversely, if you want to remain perfectly hidden and undiscoverable, you have to isolate yourself completely. But complete isolation destroys your community's cohesion.
Yeah.
Your culture dies in the dark. The embedded remnant is constantly sliding back and forth along this curve, trading safety for community.
The sources use some incredible historical deep dives to illustrate this. They spent a lot of time analyzing the Japanese hidden Christians, the Kakui Kirshitan.
Yes, fascinating example.
In 1614, the Tokugawa shogunate banned Christianity in Japan under penalty of torture and death. For over 2.5 centuries, this community maintained their faith in absolute, terrifying secrecy. How did they do it?
They navigated the curve perfectly.
Right. They disguised their religious icons. They made statues of the Virgin Mary that were carved to look exactly like the Buddhist deity canon. They chanted prayers that sounded like Buddhist sutras to the untrained ear. They participated in state-mandated temple registrations to look like compliant citizens while internally maintaining their differentiated identity.
Williams also points to the contemporary Chinese underground house churches currently navigating the state social credit system.
Right.
They are forced to use state-mandated WeChat payment apps and navigate streets covered in facial recognition cameras while secretly coordinating unauthorized gatherings in staggered, randomized locations just to avoid algorithmic detection.
But Williams makes a terrifying point about applying this to the ADCD system. In 17th century Japan, or even in modern China, with cash still circulating, you could hide in the analog gaps.
Yeah.
You could meet in a forest.
Exactly. But when every single transaction you make is logged in a CBDC, tied to your biometric face, and analyzed by an AI looking for anomalies, the analog gaps disappear. If 10 people suddenly buy extra folding chairs and bulk coffee using their digital wallets, the AI flags a potential unauthorized gathering before anyone even leaves their house.
Right. Hiding your associations requires an almost superhuman level of operational security.
Hold on. Boxing human behavior into these rigid percentages, 67%, 28%, 5%, feels way too clean for reality. People are messy. They change their minds.
They do.
What happens when a loyal, perfectly compliant member of that 67% participating majority suddenly wakes up one morning and realizes they've been locked out of their money? Say there's a glitch in the AI algorithm, or they attended a peaceful protest 3 years ago that the system just retroactively classified as non-compliant. Their biometric stand flashes red at the grocery store, and they literally cannot buy food. What is their first move? That exact scenario is why Williams introduces the 3 bifurcation theses. He argues that this demographic split is not a permanent caste system. It is a dynamic, flowing reality.
Okay, flowing reality.
First thesis is population bifurcation society sorts into the majority and a persistent minority. The second is system bifurcation. This sorting creates 2 entirely parallel economic infrastructures. But the third thesis is the answer to your question. Trajectory bifurcation.
Meaning people migrate between the groups based on events.
Yes. The population mobility between the systems is non-zero. The event you just described, the algorithmic error, or the sudden imposition of a new mandate that violates a citizen's core beliefs, that is the catalyst.
The tipping point.
Exactly. That traumatic event takes a loyal member of the participating majority and violently shoves them into the next major demographic cohort, the 28%, the disenchanted dissenters.
Let's dive deep into that 28%. This group is the entire focus of paper 8 in the meta-analysis titled Leaving Utopia. And they are fascinating because they are not the hardcore survivalists who resisted the grid from day one.
No, not at all.
These are the former early adopters. These are the people who enthusiastically scanned their retinas to get a discount on their mortgage. They bought the marketing promises of absolute security and flawless privacy.
And Williams applies theories from technology discontinuance and sociological role exit to map their journey. Over time, these individuals experience a widening gap between the utopian design phase representations and the brutal operational phase realities. They enter a five-stage trajectory of defection.
Stage 1 is enthusiastic embrace. You love the system, it works flawlessly.
Right.
Stage 2 is latent friction. This is the slow realization that things aren't quite right. You notice that your programmable CBDC won't let you buy red meat this week because the regional carbon quota was lowered. Or your transactions is delayed for 3 days pending an automated compliance review that you can't appeal. It's annoying, but you deal with it.
Then comes stage 3, the tipping point event. This is the algorithmic lockout you mentioned earlier. It is a severe privacy violation, a catastrophic service failure, or a political identity clash. The system demands you comply with a mandate that fundamentally violates your conscience, and the penalty for refusal is financial starvation.
Stage 4 is active reconsideration. You wake up to the reality of the cage you helped build, and you start actively looking for the exit. And stage 5 is defection and reincorporation. You attempt to leave the ABCD system and reincorporate into an off-grid parallel community.
But the text makes it very clear that leaving is an agonizing, high-friction process.
Oh, I can imagine.
The ABCD architecture is designed with massive sunk costs and network effects. You cannot just delete the app and walk away. If you sever your biometric identity from the grid, how do you pay your rent? How does your employer pay your salary? The system deploys powerful retention apparatuses to make defection incredibly painful.
So the author outlines bridging arrangements. These are the desperate tactics the disenchanted dissenters use to survive while they transition out.
Right.
Imagine a graphic designer in a major city. They've hit their tipping point and want out of the grid. But their landlord only accepts CBDC via a biometric portal. How do they pay rent? They might have to rely on Hawala, an ancient informal network of trust-based peer-to-peer transfers where brokers settle debts across borders without moving actual money.
Exactly.
Or they might hoard physical cash if it hasn't been completely criminalized yet, trading it on the black market at a massive premium just to acquire prepaid, non-biometric digital instruments.
They are forced to live a dual life. They selectively opt out of biometric updates where legally possible, claiming religious exemptions or medical issues. They route their income through complex, high-fee proxy networks just to obscure their spending patterns from the AI. The cognitive load and the sheer physical exhaustion of living this way are immense.
Think about the friction of trying to untangle yourself from a massive tech ecosystem today. Imagine deciding you want to delete every single trace of yourself from Google, Apple, and Amazon.
Oh, that's practically impossible.
You have to migrate years of photos, change your email address on 500 different websites, find open source maps that actually work, and somehow convince your family to download a secure, encrypted messaging app just to talk to you. It is a miserable, exhausting process. Now, multiply that friction by 1,000.
Because the stakes are higher.
The stakes aren't your photo library. The stakes are your literal ability to buy groceries, pay for heating, and receive a paycheck.
It is a profound structural extraction. But despite the grueling friction, Williams argues that this 28% eventually makes their way out. The friction of the system's coercion ultimately outweighs the friction of defection.
And when they finally break out of the ABCD grid, they don't just wander out into the wilderness to forage for berries. They migrate into an incredibly complex, highly organized, fully functioning parallel world.
They do.
And this is where the meta-analysis gets genuinely astounding. We are moving into Section 5, Architectures of Refusal and the Resistant Remnant.
The Resistant Remnant. This is the estimated 5% of the population who decline participation entirely. They refuse the biometric scanners on principle, they refuse the programmable money, they accept the financial exclusion and exit the system entirely. But papers 6 and 7 make it clear that this resistance is not a disorganized band of anarchists living in the woods.
No.
They're institutional designers, they build parallel architectures.
The author identifies 8 distinct configurations of the remnant financial system. And what is wild about this is the ideological diversity.
It's massive.
It is a massive alliance of groups that normally would have absolutely nothing to do with each other. You have physical cash advocates who just want privacy. You have the metallic sound money crowd who have been hoarding silver and gold for decades. You have the hardcore cypherpunks and self-custodied crypto developers building privacy coins.
You also have deeply traditional faith-based communities like Anabaptists or conservative Orthodox groups who operate on internal mutual aid and reject modern technological tracking on religious grounds. You have solidarity economy progressives running local community-based complementary currencies.
Got totally disparate
Yeah,
groups.
you have informal diaspora networks utilizing legacy remittance channels. You have geopolitical blocs pushing back against Western digital hegemony. And finally, you have frictional exclusion populations that are simply too rural, too isolated, or too poor for the digital grid to economically justify reaching them.
It is a staggering ideological mishmash. You have tech libertarians, deeply religious traditionalists, progressive localists, and rural farmers all finding themselves pushed into the exact same boat. They all need a way to buy and sell without a biometric scan.
And to survive, these disparate groups rely on a unified design framework that Williams acronyms as ROPE-FEIS, ROPE-FEIS.
Let's decode that. What does it stand for?
It stands for Resilient, Open Source, Parallel, Electronicless, Financial, Economic, Interoperable System.
I want to stop on that word electronicless. In a world dominated by AI and digital ledgers, actively choosing an electronicless system implies a massive, deliberate step backward in technological capability.
It is a deliberate regression in speed to achieve an absolute upgrade in resilience. If your system relies on the internet, the administering authority can shut off your internet. If it relies on electricity, they can shut off the grid. The Resistant Remnant builds institutional vehicles called OGFIs, off-grid financial institutions.
So how does an OGFI actually work? How do you run a bank without computers, without an AI risk algorithm,
Right.
and without access to the central bank's digital money?
Right.
The author says they have to replicate the 10 canonical functions of finance, things like lending, custody, clearing, medium of exchange, and risk pooling, completely isolated from the ABCD grid.
They achieve this by substituting digital algorithmic ledgers for physical, tangible assets and deep social capital. Paper 7 provides an intricate asset-to-function suitability matrix.
Okay, what does that mean in practice?
In the ABCD system, an AI scores your credit based on 1 billion data points. In an OGFI, credit is scored based on your standing reputation within a tight-knit physical community. If you default on a loan, you aren't just hurting a faceless bank, you are hurting your neighbor, and your social standing is destroyed.
And instead of digital tokens, they use physical carriers of value. The matrix outlines precious metals, productive land, durable equipment, livestock, and labor time. So walk me through the mechanics of this. How does the community actually use labor time or livestock as a medium of exchange? Are we really going back to trading cows?
In certain agrarian configurations of the remnant, yes, livestock represents a highly durable, productive asset that functions as a store of value and collateral. But let's look at labor time, which is highly practical for urban or semi-urban remnant communities. They establish time banking ledgers. If you are a plumber, you provide 3 hours of plumbing work to a dentist in the network. The OGFI ledger, which might literally be a physical paper book managed by a trusted community clerk, credits you with 3 time credits. You can then spend those 3 credits to have a mechanic fix your car. The transaction's clear without ever touching a digital network or requiring a biometric scan.
But the matrix scores how well each asset performs, right? Gold is a phenomenal long-term store of value, but trying to shave off a flake of gold to buy a cup of coffee is a terrible medium of exchange. Labor time is a great medium of exchange, but it's terrible for long-term savings because you can't bank your youth for 40 years.
Exactly. The OGFI architect has to mix and match these physical assets to create a stable local economy.
And the author maps out the brutal reality of this process. There is an inevitable, unbreakable trade-off frontier between off-grid fidelity and functional performance. You cannot maximize both.
No, you can't.
Explain that trade-off.
The more off-grid and structurally resistant your system is, meaning you use physical paper ledgers, gold coins, and face-to-face meetings, the slower, clunkier, and more geographically limited your financial performance becomes. You have absolute privacy, but you can only trade within a 10-mile radius.
Makes sense.
Conversely, the more efficient and functional you try to make your parallel system, maybe you introduce localized mesh internet networks or encrypted digital tokens to speed things up, the closer you get to relying on grid-adjacent technologies. And the closer you get to the grid, the higher the risk that the AI surveillance layer detects you.
Okay, let's play this out to its logical conclusion. Let's say one of these OGFIs gets incredibly successful. A community builds a thriving, parallel mutual credit system using physical tokens and paper ledgers. It works so well that thousands of disenchanted dissenters start migrating to it. Won't the central ABCD system, the government, just look at that massive parallel economy and say, hey, you are facilitating tax evasion and competing with our sovereign currency. We are shutting you down, or we are dragging you into the regulatory framework.
They absolutely will. Williams describes this exact mechanism as the capture and decay dynamic. It is the fundamental law of alternative financial systems. When a remnant system gets too large, too successful, or too visible, it inevitably crosses the radar of the state. The administering authority responds by bringing the OGFI into the regulatory perimeter.
They pass a law saying the time bank has to register as a money services business.
Precisely. They force the OGFI to comply with AML-CFT rules. They mandate that all participants undergo biometric KYC verification, and they force the parallel ledger to interface with the central bank's digital currency for tax reporting.
And the moment that happens, the system is captured. And once it is captured, its products immediately lose the specific remnant functions that made them valuable in the first place. The privacy evaporates, the resistance to arbitrary account freezing is gone, it just decays into another regulated node on the ABCD grid.
Leaving the true 5% resistant remnant with no choice but to abandon the very system they built, retreat further into the shadows, and start all over again, building a new, smaller, more deeply hidden OGFI. It is a perpetual, exhausting cat-and-mouse game between the central architecture and the parallel resistance.
Which brings us to the broader macroeconomic implications. Because this cat-and-mouse game doesn't just happen in the shadows, it spills out into the open markets, forcing ordinary citizens, pension funds, and institutional investors to make highly consequential bets on the future. Let's look at the feedback loop and the post-labor investor, covered in Paper 4.
Right, Paper 4 introduces a massive conditional theory regarding the interplay between the ABCD control grid and the impending wave of AI-driven labor displacement. The theory suggests that as advanced AI and robotics displace a substantial fraction of the global human labor force, governments will face an existential crisis. To prevent mass starvation and social collapse, they will be forced to respond with some form of universal basic income, or UBI.
And if you are a government that needs to distribute a UBI payment to hundreds of millions of displaced workers every single week, efficiently, with zero fraud, how do you do it?
You settle it via the ABCD grid. You distribute programmable CBDCs directly to biometric digital wallets monitored by AI. The control grid is the perfect, frictionless deployment vehicle for universal state dependency.
So if you are an institutional investor, a hedge fund manager, or just someone managing a 401k, you look at this landscape and you see two completely divergent futures. The paper outlines a bifurcated investable universe.
Yeah.
You have the participants and you have the resistance.
The participants look at the macro trends and realize that the ABCD system is going to become the dominant monopolistic settlement and capital allocation infrastructure of the entire post-labor economy. It is inevitable. So they invest aggressively in the core technologies holding it up. They pour billions of dollars of capital into cloud computing data centers, real-world asset tokenization platforms, AI behavioral modeling startups, and biometric hardware manufacturers. They want to capture the massive infrastructure rents of the new digital state.
But then you have the resistance. The paper divides them into resistant A and resistant B. These are investors who look at the exact same ABCD grid, understand exactly how profitable it will be, but decide to actively screen these technologies out of their portfolios.
Yeah.
They might do this on deep ethical or religious grounds, refusing to fund the architecture of their own surveillance. Or they might do it out of pure self-preservation, fearing that the system will eventually use its programmable money to confiscate legacy assets from non-compliant citizens.
And this creates a staggering tension with modern portfolio theory and traditional fiduciary duties.
Explain that tension.
Well, if you are managing a massive state pension fund, your legal fiduciary duty is to maximize returns for your beneficiaries. But if the biggest, most profitable growth sector in the global economy is the ABCD control grid, and your beneficiaries are philosophically opposed to living in a control grid, what do?
Right.
Do you invest in the surveillance state to ensure they have enough money to retire, knowing that the system you are funding might eventually lock them out of their retirement accounts for ideological noncompliance? The academic literature currently has no good answer for this paradox.
This brings up the concept of reflexivity mentioned in the text. I want to spend a moment letting the dark irony of this sink in.
It's very dark.
Reflexivity is basically a self-fulfilling prophecy. The futurists and academics predict a digital control grid is coming. The institutional investors, the participants, read those predictions. They decide they need to chase the 7% annualized returns, so they pour billions of dollars into building the AI, the biometric scanners, and the CBDC ledgers. And by investing all that money into the infrastructure because they think it's inevitable, they provide the exact capital required to ensure it actually becomes inevitable.
It is the coevolution of technology, capital, and control. The expectation creates the reality.
Wait, so you're telling me that the pension funds of the very citizens who are protesting against algorithmic surveillance and government overreach are likely the ones providing the foundational capital to build the control grid, simply because the portfolio algorithm demands a steady return?
Yes.
That is incredibly dark. We are literally financing the architecture of our own coercion.
It is a profound structural paradox. But Williams points out something incredibly important here with what he calls the architecture-population coupling matrix. The final outcome, the ultimate size of the resistance, whether it remains a fringe 5% or balloons into a massive 30% parallel economy that threatens the state, is dictated entirely by the design choices of the ABCD administrators.
How do the administrators control the size of the resistance?
They control the dials of friction and conditioning. If the administrators choose a rapid rollout, meaning they outlaw physical cash entirely overnight and force everyone onto biometric wallets, or if they use high-value conditioning intensity, meaning they aggressively program the money to restrict purchases based on carbon scores or political affiliations, they will create a massive immediate surge in disenchanted dissenters. The friction of the mandates will exceed the friction of defection. The parallel economy will explode in size.
But if they are smart about it,
If they are smart, they choose a slow, multi-decade phased rollout. They leave analog fallbacks in place for a long time. They don't restrict purchases too tightly at first. They let the convenience of the system slowly erode the population's memory of privacy. If they keep the temperature low, the system remains incredibly stable. The vast majority stays happily in the participating cohort, and the remnant starves for lack of numbers. Architecture and population behavior are jointly endogenous. They shape each other in real time.
we have covered an immense, overwhelming amount of ground today. We started with the physical map versus the GPS, and we mapped that onto the 4 pillars of the ABCD grid: the AI, the biometrics, the programmable money, and the digital control. We ran that architecture through the ancient mark of the beast stress test and found a structurally capable prototype. We broke down the 6-7-285 population split, explored the agonizing journey of the disenchanted dissenters, unpacked the physical, livestock-backed ledgers of the parallel OGFIs, and stared into the self-fulfilling prophecy of post-labor investing.
It is a breathtaking, rigorous synthesis of exactly where financial technology, human psychology, and state power are dragging modern society.
But I want to bring the massive macro scope of this meta-analysis back down to the ground. Back to you, the listener. Because while this research sounds like high-level macroeconomic theory, you are the one who is going to have to navigate this architecture-population equilibrium. You are going to have to make a choice.
We all are.
Will you rationally trade your transactional autonomy for the frictionless convenience, the security, and the UBI payments of the 67% participating majority? Will you attempt to walk the agonizing tightrope of the covert embedded remnant, hiding your true beliefs from the algorithm? Or will you endure the massive friction of building bridging arrangements to operate off-grid? The one thing the Williams corpus makes absolutely, unequivocally clear is that unreflected participation will soon be mathematically impossible. The dial is turning.
The micro choices we make at the margin today, transaction by transaction, are pouring the concrete for the architecture of tomorrow.
And I want to leave you with a final provocative thought that builds on everything we've explored today. The sources talk heavily about the capture and decay dynamic at the institutional level. The state finds an off-grid bank, brings it into the regulatory perimeter, and neutralizes it. But think about what happens when that capture dynamic infiltrates interpersonal relationships.
That's a terrifying thought.
In a bifurcated society, the 5% resistant remnant relies entirely on physical, social trust. Their entire banking system runs on standing reputation, analog handshakes, shared labor, and deep community bonds.
Social trust is their only true capital. If the trust breaks, the parallel economy collapses.
Exactly. So what happens when the central ABCD system realizes it cannot track the off-grid economy algorithmically because there are no digital ledgers? The system is blind to the time banks and the physical asset trades. What happens when the state decides to leverage its most powerful weapon, its programmable money? Imagine the system begins offering massive financial bounties, Instant, highly conditioned CBDC deposits directly to your biometric wallet, offered as a reward for participants to report on the off-grid parallel economic activities of their friends, their neighbors, or their own family members. Does that parallel economy collapse from within, poisoned by suspicion and the overwhelming incentive to defect? Or does that immense pressure forge a new, hyper-resilient evolution of human loyalty that the AI simply cannot model?
It tests the very fabric of human relationships, pitting the bonds of community directly against the infinite financial incentives of the machine.
Just like that old physical paper map in the glove box, it didn't ask anything of us. It just showed us the roads. But the new GPS demands to know exactly where we are at all times to make the journey smoother. The terrifying question is, when the GPS finally asks us to report on the cars that decided to drive off-road, what will we do? Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the source material. Stay curious, stay reflective, and we'll see you next time.